News, play breakdowns, power rankings, storylines you never hear talked about anywhere else. It's all straight shots here, fired by straight shooters. S and Gun. This is the Objective Basketball Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Objective Basketball Podcast. My name is Esfandi Arberahini, joined alongside Lauren Gunn, and it is Tuesday morning if you are listening to this in the morning, Tuesday afternoon, potentially if you're listening to this in the afternoon, maybe even Tuesday night while you're enjoying some basketball. We have a guest. That means, because it is Tuesday, we have a guest. So we are joined by Grant Afseth. He is of the DallasBasketball.com. I don't know if there's a "the" in there, but it is DallasBasketball.com. Mavericks beat writer. And it's funny because we have two Mavericks people here to talk about the Dallas Mavericks. Always good to talk about Luka and Kyrie. Kyrie seems to have, missed out on a pretty substantial injury. That was a really scary moment with Dwight Powell as a fellow Canadian. I apologize for Dwight Powell. That was a very scary moment. Okay, look, let's start off with the Mavericks. They started the season well. They have kind of gotten to, I don't know if you want to say like a slower start. They've been perfectly fine, but they've been 5-5 in their last 10. So not as hot as they were to start out the gate. Some injuries have maybe derailed some of that. Grant Williams right now is injured. Kyrie Irving was in and out of the lineup. I guess overall, Grant, to just start this conversation off, especially with us being at around the 20-ish game mark, we can take in some of the stats. We can take in some of the numbers. What is your overall read on this Mavericks team that is currently third in the Western Conference?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is they still have a very similar identity as they had in recent years around Luka, where they're a very three-point, make or miss sort of team. They were very hot coming out of the gate from three, I think through like their first 10 games, started 8-2. And as you said, they kind of tapered off. The shooting dissipated and, teams started to get a little more creative with how they approached guarding them as well. They started putting their center on Derrick Jones and pre-rotated off of him. And then they had like their biggest wing kind of switch in the ball screening actions when Dereck Lively was involved to kind of take them out of their, like those easy like drop coverage situations that Luka tends to just tear defenses apart operating out of. And then I think, they've actually improved defensively from that start. So that kind of tells you, even with defensive improvement over that 5-5, stretch that you mentioned, that just tells you how important and vital shooting is to their overall success.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you mentioned the defense. I think that's probably the biggest question mark for me in terms of like, you can obviously see the improvements like you've mentioned and, but they are still a bottom 10 team in defense. And so I think I want to ask you what you think, the answer might be. Do you think that they, Dante Exum getting more time, do you think that they should kind of just keep trying to build the continuity with what they have and keep growing their defensive identity kind of organically and in-house? Or do you kind of think that maybe whether it be a lineup change, continuing to have these sort of lineup changes, or maybe even looking elsewhere for size at maybe those wing spots, what direction do you think they should go?
Yeah, I definitely think in the long run, they will need to look to add more size, a more dynamic like difference maker on the wing, because I think when you look at some of the top 10 teams defensively in the NBA, a lot of them have those like dynamic talents that kind of set the tone with those like special attributes. And, I think Dereck Lively as a rim protector and just general defender could be one of those players as he develops. But early in his career, you want to take pressure off of him, and they're going to need more perimeter size in general, because there's a lot of times when they get into those lineups throughout games with those plug and play groups, they're just very small. Like, even when like one injury starts to happen, like Grant Williams goes down, and even he's only 6'6", it gets really small. Like Jaden Hardy gets thrown out there, Josh Green, a lot of like 6'5" and under, 6'4" and under type of guys. When a lot of these other teams that they'll line up against, it really is pretty staggering difference. Like sometimes Toronto, even Denver, those types of teams, they have like a lot of 6'8" and up guys. And that just really adds up for a team that needs to, close possessions on the glass at a more effective rate. It's very hard to do when you make all these rotations and then you're just too small at the very end of the play.
Right.
So that's definitely something that makes a big difference for sure, in my opinion.
28th in rebound percentage this year. They haven't been that good of a rebounding team. And I think, to your point, that size comes into play this year. Just how they're going to be able to defend. And also, it's a versatility thing on defense, right? It's like when you can, like you said, you have an advantage against certain teams, but against teams that have those wings, have those bigger body players, how are you going to try to figure out a way to scheme those guys out? It's definitely a question you have to ask yourself. In that Toronto game, they didn't have Dereck Lively. That's one thing that I got to point out, and I think the Raptors took full advantage of that. I guess I just wanted to ask you, Lively has been an awesome rookie to start this year. Like the box score stats don't necessarily jump out to you, but the fact that he's like almost a 10-10 type of player with a couple of blocks a game, that's amazing for what he is at his position. What sort of your overall grand scheme takeaways from Lively, how he sort of looked in year one, and I guess maybe looking forward into April and May, if you think this is tangible for him to be the starting center when you're trying to win playoff games?
Yeah, I think actually when you take it back to the summer when he started, preparing for Summer League and playing in Summer League, I had the opportunity to kind of cover him throughout that whole period. And what really stood out to me, even just weeks after the draft, was how like coachable, how mature, how intelligent he was when you talk to him. Like you can ask him anything about basketball and he'll have like a really detailed, like just on the money, like response about what he's supposed to do,
That's
like
awesome.
what's happening. Mm-hmm. And so I just was like, okay, like that guy gets it. And the other part of being a successful player is you have to have the physical tools. And he's 7'1", 7'7" wingspan. And what really stood out from the jump and has continued to stand out is when he contests jump shots, it's just really tough to shoot over him. Like he's just, he's got a lot of length and he can actually switch, handle that well. He's continuing to improve in that regard. And, just a lot of the things that they laid out for him to improve dating back to the summer, he's really improved in that area, or those areas, like finishing touch even. Like you could see him working with Tyson Chandler, in the practice facility in July. And then all of a sudden he's getting into some like finishing touches that you just didn't see him execute at Duke. And, I think just the skill set overall is maximized, the approach that he has, like in the vertical lob threat type of guy. And, the backline sort of like rim protector who communicates, talks a lot. That was also something that really stood out about him. And he actually tells everyone, he said, what I'm going to bring is a lot of energy. I'm going to bring communication. You're going to hear me talking from the 10th row. Like he said at like media day and just throughout his whole time with the Mavs. So just, he's like kind of like everything you would want in a center that does all the dirty work. And I think it's just a little bit more time for him to keep figuring it out, add layers to his game. And, I think a big part, not to ramble too much, but like to think about one part.
No, you're good. I've brought you on here to ramble. I need you to ramble.
I'm living for the ramble.
For sure. One thing that I always liked about him, like kind of just watching his film at Duke, was how he makes reads out of short rolls. But, against the OKC Thunder a few games ago, what really stood out is like, they told him, like, basically don't pass the effing ball, like just score, look to score, put it on the floor and attack the rim. And he was like, oh, okay, I guess I can try that. And then he just posters Chet Holmgren making that low man rotation. It was like, oh, I guess that was easy. All right, well, I'll just do that more. So, like, seeing that like 3 times in one game, he scored as the short roll attacker. And he's always been good on those passing reads, as I mentioned. So, like, kind of putting those pieces together where he's kind of figuring out, wow, I can, like, really do this and that. And, that's what the team wants me to do. And, playing alongside a guy like Luka and then also Kyrie as well, there's just a lot of, like, pressure on the defense at the point of attack that he can just feast, whether it's on the offensive boards or just finishing plays. So there's a lot to like about what he brings. And I think he's just continuing to gradually figure it out. And as teams throw out different schemes at a guy like Luka, which – there's a lot of different looks that results, like defenses throw. So you're just like seeing all those and like all the game within the game, even not even just like, like a week long of like this type of coverage, like just like, oh, okay, well they might mix this up when I see this. Now it's more instinctual, so that just makes it a lot easier overall on both sides of the ball. I feel like for him as time goes on. So I think he'll be very effective, come playoff time. And I think he's definitely someone who we've already seen, like who was talked about as like, oh, he could spend time in Frisco, like in July, like people were talking about with the G League team.
Right.
Well, now he quickly took the starting role in like as 19. So like I will always bet on Dereck Lively if you're going to give him time to show improvement and continue to get comfortable and learn and build on his skill set for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm glad we're talking about Lively so early, because I do think that he's such a big part of kind of this new identity. Like he's changed so much for Dallas. And when you talk about the really impactful areas in which he's learning so quickly, it completely changes things for the Mavs. And so I think focusing on the offensive end, kind of, you mentioned like him looking to attack out of the short roll and be aggressive and looking to score. What kind of are I'm going to be greedy here, but what are the next kind of areas that you're kind of excited and can sort of see him growing, whether it be, stretching the floor, putting on the weight, and just being even more aggressive at the rim? What are you kind of keeping your eye on?
Yeah, I think over this next period, for however long Kyrie is out, I definitely think building upon the short roll attacking is going to be huge, because teams are going to get aggressive with full court pressure to wear Luka down, and they're going to blitz him like Portland did. And Portland's actually been a very effective defensive team. I think in the last little while, I saw stats, they were like 6th in defensive rating over a certain period. I forgot the exact time, but they weren't like the typical, like, this team's terrible and horrible at everything, this is kind of an easy win sort of opponent. Like, they actually had athletes and like an actual like aggressive defensive game plan. They mixed things up, so that was interesting to see Lively continue to play in that sort of situation. And so I think there'll be more like replicated situations kind of going forward throughout this next period with Kyrie out. So that will probably be a big thing. And then I think just in general, overall, just continuing to make plays when there is an advantage. I think like with the matchups, like if, as we mentioned, like other teams are putting their center sometimes on Derrick Jones, which actually is not sometimes, it's pretty often, especially early in games. So at some point it'd be interesting to see if they're like, okay, Lively has a matchup advantage. Let's see what he can do with the ball, like with the size. So I mean, that's probably going to be a long-term thing. And also with his shooting, I think he showed at his pro day with Clutch Sports that he can really shoot the three, at times, like outside of the game setting, but seeing
slowly
it in a game setting.
Sure.
For sure. And I think it's shot, like, when you go to shoot arounds and stuff like that, obviously that's not a game where like someone's closing out on him and everything, but like it does look like it's getting smoother and things, and just in general. So I think long term, those are probably two very interesting things to think about, because matchups are very hard to factor when you're dealing with Luka, 6'7" guard who can just pretty much get an advantage against any matchup. But if you factor in a big that's kind of more hands-on and like the matchup, like attacking element of the game, that gets really like kind of nightmarish if you think about it. So those are definitely things that I'm going to keep an eye on. But the short-term thing is definitely that short roll attacking and, just kind of being that release valve for Luka when teams really start to load up on him with Kyrie out.
When you mentioned the short roll creation, I think to your point, the release valve is huge, but it also it puts pressure on the second line of the defense, right? Because now they're forced to react. It was always Luka trying to create out of the perimeter, right? Maybe even the post, right? It was like one line of creation and then it was to a play finisher. But now when you have Kyrie, who is another creator, when you have Dereck Lively, who can in the middle of the floor attack the second line of the defense, it opens up so many more possibilities for you. Wanted to ask you about the guy everybody is wondering when it comes to the Mavericks, the guy me and you talked about very extensively in the summer, and that is Josh Green. Okay. In and out of the rotation to start the year has slowly started to get back, if I'm not mistaken, be an active part of the rotation for the most part. I came into this season thinking this is going to be a big year for Josh Green. How has that been so far? And maybe why has that not materialized yet? Because, the extension talks, all that stuff, it came to the point where it was he's going to be a big part of this future. And I don't feel like I've seen that or I've felt that yet when I watch the Mavs.
Yeah, it feels a lot like the post-trade deadline period of last year, where he's more comfortable when one of the superstars are out and they're able to kind of run more actions for him. Whether it's like the out of the corner, like double wide pin downs or like handoffs, zoom actions and stuff. That's kind of where I feel like he makes his greatest imprint on the game. And that doesn't really happen as much whenever he's playing next to Luka and Kyrie. But I do think overall, when you look at I haven't looked at it lately, but I do think that the numbers usually tend to be pretty favorable when he does share the floor with them. So I think he does a lot of the little things, regardless of whether he's kind of hitting those threes, because he really flies around the half court. Sometimes he fouls too much still, and sometimes he struggles with handling navigating screens at times. I think that's another thing that he can continue to improve on. But overall, I do think there's still a lot to like beyond the box score with him. And I think actually Jason Kidd praised that not too long ago. He actually called his game against the Washington Wizards where he didn't score at all as his best game of the season. Like that's could be a lot of coach speak, but like that's kind of how the team in general views him. I think is just like that impact that goes beyond like the box score. He does a lot of little things, and I think naturally a lot's going to rely on whether his three is falling or not. Because when you have like 40 to 50+% of your attempts coming from spot ups, like if that's not falling, it's kind of like Reggie Bullock last year, or like Grant Williams as well this year. Like that, it's not many ways to make up for scoring if that's kind of a huge chunk of what you're going to be providing. But overall, for a team that likes to play faster and pick up the pace, I do think an athlete like Josh Green and like the ability to kind of push the pace as a handler and also on leak outs, I think that definitely helps overall. So I think kind of seeing how he settles in and gets comfortable. He's had some strong performances, but seeing consistency will definitely be something to kind of watch like throughout the next however long it takes him to get back from the elbow injury. I think it took him like 4 to 6 weeks, and it was like a very similar elbow sprain last year. So overall, and it's actually kind of crazy because it was almost like the same time of year too. Like it was early December, so like maybe he'll be back like early January, whatever. Like I'm not too positive on that, but like if the timeline's similar, I think he was like mid-January, like January 14th or something like that last year. So definitely something to keep an eye on is how long he'll be out, and then how he gets comfortable settling back in, once he is back. Because as you guys mentioned, like with Dante Exum, as someone to kind of think about, that's someone who's really stepping up lately, and how they kind of solve that rotation construction. Will be interesting post like Josh Green injury return for sure.
So, Lauren, can I ask you a question real quick?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so Grant kind of gave me an idea here, and I'm kind of curious to see what both of you guys think of this. So, just looking at the Mavericks lineups, the most heavily used lineups, they don't have a lineup that has played more than 100 minutes together. 99 minutes for their starting lineup of Kyrie, Luka, Derrick Jones Jr., Grant Williams, and Dereck Lively. They are minus 2.8 in those 99 minutes together. So not very good for a starting lineup. But when you have other units out there that are like overwhelmingly positive, you have Luka, Derrick Jones Jr., Grant Williams, Josh Green, Dereck Lively. In 36 minutes, they're plus 18.6. Then on the other side, you have another version of that starting five, which is Kyrie, Luka, Grant Williams, Josh Green, Dereck Lively, plus 11.6. Then in 24, like you have so many different versions of a similar-esque lineup that are positive, whereas the starting lineup hasn't necessarily been positive. As an outside observer, why might that be? Like, what am I not getting here that maybe those other iterations of the starting lineup are working, but not the actual version? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. Personally, in my opinion, a lot of it does have to do with just the general fluidity of kind of finalizing what the rotation is going to be, and also kind of gauging the difference, the advantages versus different matchups. And I think generally, like Grant said earlier, they're still generally undersized in that starting lineup a little bit, especially when your backcourt is maybe not the strongest defensively. And so, in my opinion, a lot of it also has to do with a lot of questions that I have about the rotation kind of come back to Tim Hardaway Jr.'s hot start and how reliant, they have been at times on him in the minutes that they've given him and the opportunities that they've given him, and how that's affected someone like Josh Green off the bench in his minutes, and where the defensive impact, kind of like a domino effect, kind of struggles a bit. And so I think that they do a really good job of the minutes where they stagger Luka and Kyrie and how they keep that consistency. I think it's really about building the continuity around them. Like when you're giving Dante Exum extended, like an increased role, increased minutes, and then someone like Josh Green is maybe struggling from the consistency. I think the general size and then the fluidity kind of, it plays against them a little bit, but I do believe, in my opinion, that once they sort of get that sorted out, I think the Josh Green injury is really unfortunately timed right now. Right. But then which they always are. But I mean, when you're considering the trade deadline coming up and what that could mean, and potential guys coming in or out of the rotation in general, that could really open things up to maybe go more defensive heavy, or maybe even go a little bit younger and get Josh Green eventually, and also Jaden Hardy out there with Dante Exum, to where they're just playing with extreme pace. And then, maybe you have less minutes. So I think they've got a lot of options, and I think that ultimately they will figure it out. But I'm sort of looking to see with okay, do you keep relying on Tim Hardaway Jr.? Do you keep looking to give Seth more opportunity? Do you try and go back to Richaun Holmes? Like, there are so many questions right now within the rotation. And so I think that those small sample size, under 100 minutes, for some of those bench groups, that's where I think you're kind of seeing, okay, adjustments, like quick adjustments within the game, early in games, and even sometimes in the third quarter of, oh, we got to kind of lean this way and lean into this. And that's where you see some of those effective, impactful lineups. And that's props to them for making the adjustments. Whereas sometimes I think starting right out the gate, sometimes they're just overmatched in certain games. The Denver one, to be specific.
Grant, I guess I'll ask you sort of the same thing if you wanted to jump in there. And
Yeah, I think a lot of that is definitely like my thought as well. Like they've definitely had games where they've decided like at halftime, like we're just going to put Josh Green instead of Derek Jones because we feel more comfortable of him attacking like a center being like his matchup as opposed to like just sticking with the same look with when Derek Jones is struggling to shoot from three in a particular game. But overall, definitely, I think a lot of it has to do with not necessarily having like the ideal like long-term personnel that you would like to have next to Kyrie and Luka, because I think a lot of it is you list pros and cons for a lot of those guys on the wing, and like Tim Hardaway Jr., as you mentioned, is someone that like, you know, there's times where if his three's not falling, he's watching, him and Luka are kind of just watching rebounds fly and allowing offensive like rebounds, putbacks, things like that. And, like there's a lot of times where there's big swings in games when that happens, and too many players are not necessarily like the ideal size. They don't have the ideal like, I guess you could say like all around skill set as well, like to make up for certain parts of their game, not necessarily flourishing on a given night. So I think a lot of it, like ideally, like last year, you look at how the defense kind of shaked out. And when Tim Hardaway started frequently at the three, there was no player that got scored on more in the post, like total volume wise, than Tim last year. And that's like whether it was like a late season game against the Miami Heat, Jimmy Butler was posting him up, or, you know, like switching, he ended up getting stuck on a big, things like that. Like they're definitely undersized against those bigger wings. And I think that's carried over into this season, even with, you know, like Derek Jones kind of handling those quicker guards, and then Grant Williams trying to handle those bigger like threats in general. Like even like he against Denver, he was put on Jokic for a good stretch where Lively was able to play that kind of roamer off of Aaron Gordon, and you know, nothing really worked that night, but you know, at least it gives you a little more confidence to try stuff. But you know, like beyond those guys, you get into situations where you're not gonna try putting anyone else on like Jokic, and Aaron Gordon's gonna cause problems. You know, just a lot of matchup nightmares where 6'4", 6'5" guys are not really capable of being like that base matchup, and switching makes it even worse. So overall, definitely think that they're going to have to like kind of look at their lineup combinations. I do think the Dante Exum like production recently has been intriguing because he is 6'6" with like a 6'9" wingspan, and he's got a big frame as well, so he can handle big matchups and he can pick up full court against quicker guards. So I think that's definitely something to watch at the three spot. That kind of, I guess, gets you out of being limited in offensive, like off-ball skill sets too. Like there was times last year where they got caught with spot-up heavy guys who just couldn't put it on the floor and like take too many difficult shots. And I think with Exum, at least, that kind of makes the ability to like have a different attack, a more layered attack to punish the other team and make them more cognizant of their matchups. Because when you have three guards and one of them is just going to put a lot of rim pressure alongside Luka and Kyrie, that definitely, you know, is a very like challenging thing to hide like a smaller perimeter player, because then they're just going to bring up that four to set screens and switch hunt, or they can just play out of different actions. Like they try to play out of some like horn sets with Dereck Lively, like against the Trailblazers, and really kind of utilize his passing ability and like double drag screens and things like that. And I think overall, even if he's just a handoff big out in perimeter, that's really hard to account for all the matchups if you have three like dynamic, I guess you could say like perimeter players in their own right. Like whether like Exum's not like on the same, obviously it's the same level as like Luka Kyrie, but I consider dynamic in the sense of like you can hunt matchups as well. Like he had a small guard on him in the post last game against the Blazers, where he just kind of a couple back down dribbles and just threw a pass to the dunker spot for an assist. Like that's not really something you see from like a Josh Green, or like he has some sequences where he does make those secondary like playmaking like looks, but you just have more options when you can move around like different guys like Exum and like attack, like, and also have him to push the pace. He's been the most important player for the team, like kind of in praise, like from the coaching staff and just like players in terms of pushing the pace. Like if you look at the on-off numbers as well, I think that translates from last time I checked. So if you have like the ideal like personnel where you can kind of provide that versatile defensive option at 6'6", and then he can attack the paint, provide that rim pressure that you haven't had in recent years, and he's helping you push the pace and get into half court sets where you can have Luka and Kyrie off ball. That's really like tough to have that like reliable like initiator, because there are some games where like you're in the middle of the floor and like Luka or Kyrie is down screening for each other and they're getting into like a middle floor like zoom action. Like that's just like, how do you even like with Dereck Lively is the big, like you can't leave the nail area and let Dereck Lively in the paint, but then you also have to be very like fearful of the matchups that you're putting on either of those guys. So like there's a lot of layers like that when you trust like a third ball handler that can really get you into your offense and push the pace. That definitely makes it intriguing. So I think that will probably be something to watch overall and think about as how they kind of build a roster going forward. But then again, they're also very limited on the assets they have mid-season when we're putting our like front office cap on, because they can only trade their 2027 first mid-season until that like that final Porzingis first round pick like conveys to the Knicks. So overall, like it's definitely an interesting thing, and a reason why, like I always say, like there's a reason why they're a GM and I'm talking about it on a podcast. Very, very, very complicated overall when you factor in everything for a pro team, for sure.
You know what? I will say though, and like Lauren, we've had this discussion before, like I think the prospect pool of the Mavericks is intriguing enough to get you in the conversation for some of these players. We had this conversation about Pascal Siakam earlier, right? And like how Pascal might work as a trade candidate, trade target. He'd obviously be an ideal fit for the Mavericks and what they need. But also it's just like, okay, would they be able to get in the door with what they're offering, right? Jaden Hardy, I don't know if Josh Green, whatever, Omac, I don't know who it would be, but like, ultimately, I think there is a prospect pool there that could eventually become the bulk of what a trade could be for someone. Who that someone is, who knows? Not sure. ... That's more of a Lauren question. That's more of a you question. I have no idea. I wanted to ask you something before we get into trade talks, though, and that is, it's sort of related. You mentioned pace, right? And the Mavericks were near the top of the league in pace to start the season. They've kind of slowed down a little bit. They're near like top 10-ish now. Kyrie, when he got traded there, I thought that was one of the biggest pros in getting a guy like Kyrie. He's consistently going to push the pace for you. I thought for the most part, he does do that, right? I guess my question to you is, I feel like the Kyrie Luka potential, like some of the screening actions that they maybe could have had, having Kyrie be the screener for Luka, having Luka be the screener for Kyrie. Have we seen enough of that, or would you want to see more of that? Because I feel like I want to see more of that. Just those two guys, kind of creating plays for each other, ghosting a screen action, whatever. Luka is shooting 40% on pull-up threes right now. So there's a pretty good, I think there's a way to draw so much attention with that action and then create for these other complementary players. Have we seen them tap into that a lot, or do they need to tap into it more?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a matchup-based thing for me personally, because I think the core of how they want to attack is they know that Luka is going to be a nightmare on switch hunting, and they have a lot of like mechanisms to generate that. And basically, like the goal was to force like double teams, and then they play 4-on-3. And then, you have guys that are more capable of putting on the floor this year, like Derek Jones. You have Exum as well. And I think they showed that last game to be pretty effective. So I think that's like ideally at the core what they'd like to do. And then I think, when you build on that, you play some teams that aren't going to be as, like aggressive with blitzing and everything. I think that's when you can really get into the screening actions. Like I think in general, like you should mix in different looks throughout a game so you don't like gas Luka out and like make it very challenging for him to close the game. But I think overall, like I do like some of the actions that they put him in, like even without Kyrie involved, like there's been times where he's put in like double staggers or double wide pin downs, whatever you want to call them, out of the corner, and that's something that he did during the World Cup. That was very like difficult for opposing teams to handle. He's going to draw a lot of fouls in those situations. I feel like, because you have to be very physical with someone who's that big and that skilled. And I think he's one of the like best process players, like in terms of like recognizing how defenses are reacting, how to like
No
punish
question.
them. So like when you're in those like you're in those actions, there's a lot that goes on, and then you're stressing the back end of the defense with a low man, and so like you can really like make quick like just easy like situations out of that where you're not necessarily having to break down a defender off the dribble like so often in ISO and things like that. So I think whether it's involving Kyrie or not, I do think I'd like to see that more. But I do think overall, like matchup dependent, if you're playing a team like Portland and they're going to full court press, Luka likes actually to be full court pressed. I actually asked him about that, like in New Orleans when he struggled and turned it over like 8 times. I was like, you know, like Grant Williams mentioned, like he's kind of crazy, like the way he plays the game. Like he's honestly, if you ask him, like it's kind of funny when you think about how Luka sees the game. A lot of times, if you ask him about actions or things like that, he's going to tell you it helps me be less tired. And then, like that's like the main benefit. Like he just needs like enough gas in the tank at the end of the game. But then also, it's like if they double team me, I pass. If they don't double team me, I score. Like that's just how easy the game is to him. Like it's just kind of crazy to me. Like so overall, like that's how a lot of it kind of boils down. But I thought like even like the comment about like, you know, being full court press was kind of fascinating because he's like, yeah, I actually like being full court press. I just needed to drive more. I needed to just be more aggressive. Like, oh, okay. Like, I guess the game is just that easy for someone like that. But like, so that's just kind of the mindset overall is I think like they want to just force those double teams.
Luka's a funny guy,
the game's
man.
pretty simple with the 4-on-3, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I think one thing that's kind of, I feel like I've been keeping an eye on, and I don't quite know what the answer is unless it's like a trade that inevitably happens, or not inevitably, but like potentially happens. When I'm looking at Jaden Hardy and like kind of the things that are hoped and an idealized version of Jaden Hardy and like the areas of which he improves. I know playmaking and kind of being more of a ball handler and playmaker to just set guys up was kind of a big point of emphasis over the offseason and kind of moving forward. But looking at the current construction of the roster, and then obviously what's happening in the games, it's hard for him to get in there and find that spot. And so I guess where do you see, I don't want to say just his long-term fit, but sort of what opportunities do you see for him to sort of really just establish himself as a consistent guy for them to go to? Or do you think that now just might not be the time?
Yeah, I think now probably is not the time right now. I think when you look at last year, the roster was very limited offensively. They even tried like Campazzo and Kemba Walker early on, and like that got a little desperate after like pretty quickly. So I think like when you add in like Dante Exum, Seth Curry, guys like that, they're more insulated for having to rely on Jaden with what he provides overall. I think like Summer League was a good show of like how he handled like testing him, I should say, not showing how he handled, but just testing him as like a top option against all the focus of the game planning, a lot of defensive pressure. And I think he left like a good amount to be desired there. I think, that kind of showed like where he could develop and progress as the focus of the unit. So, but overall, I think he's shown to be able to attack off the catch like pretty well, whether it's like catch and shoot or just attacking closeouts. But beyond that, like there's a lot of players on the roster that can provide like catch shoot ability, things like that. So there has to be more layers to it, to what he provides, especially with the size limitations. So I think the big thing for him will be to show that he can really like mature in getting the offense into sets and things like that, similar to how Exum does. And then to be more like consistent in terms of just like decision making. Like there's times where he's attacking the paint, whether it's like semi-transition or just in general as like an initiator, and he's like kind of just crashing to the ground, and like there's a layup that's like coming off the glass like without much of an outlook to go in, or he's turning it over. So I think he's still trying to like really figure out his advantages, especially with how the roster has changed this season. And I think that definitely is okay considering he's like in his second year and he was a second round pick. So it's like that's something to definitely think about overall. It's like in the grand scheme of things, like the progression is not always linear. Will we know how good he's going to be ultimately in his career? No, but like I think the long-term potential of learning behind guys like Seth Curry, like Kyrie, Luka, all the guys on the roster will be valuable for him. And I think that's probably more of where he'll make his impact is probably as that future piece when guys like, like Seth Curry are pretty old, like in terms of like being long-term, like complementary fits, the more of a stopgap option, which like the contract would suggest as well. So I think like learning from everything around him and then showing that progression and having like, I guess you could say like the minor victories of like within the spot minutes or like injuries happen.
Right.
And he steps up like incremental progress, I think would be
Small
definitely
wins,
small wins for sure. Cause that's a big part of player development for sure. Cause like last year he got thrown in the fire pretty aggressively at times. Like I always like to point back to this part of the season, like March, I think it was like March 8th or something in New Orleans. Luka like doesn't finish the fourth quarter. Hardy has to come in. And then Luka's like, I have a quad injury. Like, we don't even know what it is. And, you know, it's been bothering me since the All-Star break. And it's like, okay, that's concerning. So then he's out for a couple of games. And then Kyrie, like, injures himself and doesn't play in the next game as well. So then, like, Jaden Hardy went from 2 games prior.
Was it the Utah game, right?
I think it was the first one. I forgot what the one with the DNP was. Yeah, I think, and then New Orleans was when Luka mentioned the injury, and then I think it was Memphis. Because, I took a 13-hour Amtrak train from New Orleans to Memphis, so I'll never forget that part of the calendar. I'll never forget that. Because flying was way too expensive on, like, spring break time, so I took that Amtrak train. I'll never forget that. And Kyrie wasn't able to play. So then Jaden went from, like, DNP one night to closing the fourth quarter to the first option, taking over 20 shots for 3 straight games, like 60 total combined plus field goal attempts. So, like, that type of situation is very hard to, like, you know, like have a lot of, like, you know, linear progress and, like, just gradual improvements. So I think, you know, having an ability to kind of earn that spot and be consistent will be key for him. And I just don't know if that's like the right time right now. Because I think when you're trying to win coming off of a season where you didn't make the play-in tournament, you need those reliable, like steady-handed veterans that are going to consistently contribute. You know what you can expect. And because you can't have another down year. Like you got to keep Luka happy. And then like obviously you have no idea how ownership stuff even factors into stuff, but when you're changing majority owners, like I think naturally people start to think about like big picture stuff, like, okay, so are we on the same page with this, whether like Mark Cuban's still running president like basketball operations or not. That's kind of like gets out of the element. I think everyone just kind of focuses on like, okay, so there's big changes going on. What are we doing to still compete for a title? Does this change how you're doing it around me? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Okay, great. We're on the same page. But still, I need to see progress. Like, it kind of makes you more leery of, like, things going on, and you need to see results, especially after that, like, 38 and 44 season. So I think overall, like, that's kind of how it factors in is, like, it's probably not the right time for him. And as the roster kind of settles itself out over the next couple seasons, I feel like that could factor in. But then again, if you're in a win-now mode, that's where the trade, like, sort of ideas kind of flow, because where it's like, was that really the right piece for right now, or is he better suited on a rebuilding team for sure?
It's funny you say that, because if I were to, again, from an outsider's perspective, if I were to answer the question, have they made Luka more happier or more content with the progress this season? I think I would say yes. I think this summer they were aggressive in getting guys that match this type of style that they want to play, that match what Luka and Kyrie need. I think Dereck Lively was a home run in terms of a draft prospect. And ultimately, even if you're not, maybe you are, maybe you think, I was going to bring this question up now, but like, even if you're not contending for a championship this year, you are building the process for what a championship team will eventually be. In that, you know, rim protector, rolling, short roll creator, and Dereck Lively, he will play a part in whatever the next championship this Mavericks team will contend for. Obviously, Luka and Kyrie will be a big part of that as well. You're trying out these different guys in a Derrick Jones Jr., in a Grant Williams, in a Josh Green to see how you can fill out the wing rotation. That's something that will inevitably grow. But I think in terms of the process, this has been a massive win for the Luka, hey, let's keep you satisfied here in Dallas thing. Would you guys, both of you guys, would you guys agree with that statement that this was inevitably this like last 12 months, but not even less than 12 months, 6-7 months has been a major win to keep Luka a little bit more happy?
Yeah,
I guess Grant,
I definitely say so. Because if you let's think about like what the situation was on opening night last year. It was Spencer Dinwiddie as the backcourt partner, which is okay. Like he was a helpful player, but like ideally he was in that 6-man role where he was that extra like punch throughout like the 9 rounds, if you will, of like the game. And then you look at like Dorian Finney-Smith, he was solid too. But, you know, he's kind of a limited offensive player, like a really good catch and shoot player, but he's not someone that's going to like create out of a ball screen. Reggie Bullock was even more limited, and
Right.
JaVale McGee was the starting center. Like that was a lot of limited skill sets. Where you got into a weird situation where it was like, okay, Christian Wood provides an offensive spark. Can we play him next to Luka and Spencer Dinwiddie? Well, the defense is not nearly good enough. So then you got into like a really like weird situation where it's like, okay, well, we felt those guys, JaVale and Christian Wood, were upgrades over Dwight Powell,
Right.
but now we're putting Dwight Powell back out as a starting center. And then it's just like you're not really progressing when you said like that's the big improvement off of Western Conference Finals run is we need a rim protector, we need this like defensive rebounding, and you end up going back to the limited personnel at the 5 very frequently, like Dwight Powell, Maxi Kleber, that you had during that run. So I think like when you look at what they have now, like Dereck Lively is a massive home run because now you have clarity. You also, it's not even just like the long-term hope. You also know there's immediate results because there's a big difference in presence when he's off the floor, like with what they have like as alternative options, whether it's like Dwight Powell or Rashawn Holmes or anyone else that's really like, or Markieff Morris in spot minutes or even Kleba. Like that really makes a big difference when you kind of already have that confidence that, that's a long-term answer. And then you start to look at the wing positions, like as you guys said, you think about like Grant Williams, when his three is clicking, that's a helpful player. He can guard bigger players as well with his frame. Derek Jones can fly around the half court, and they've been successful defensively when the intended starting 5 is on the floor. It's just then you get into the whole thing of like, would one of those guys be better long-term being a bench piece? Do we have enough talent to make that happen? And then you look at some of the other parts of the roster, Omax Prosper, 6'8" wing. That's the great size that you would want, like with a 7-foot wingspan. But how soon can he kind of get fluid offensively and get comfortable? I think he's shown flashes defensively. Like he handled Shai Gilgeous-Alexander well in the fourth quarter of, like the game that they really need to rely on him against the Thunder and just different matchups as well. And, if you look at him, he's someone that's putting in work. Like it's, facility, he did the old school cone drills. He was sliding. He was working on slides. And then he immediately translated it against the Thunder and got stops against Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So that's right. Like, the old school put the work in, using the cones and then getting stopped. We'll see how that works over the, rest of the season. If he can step into a bigger role and show like, consistency in what he's able to do. Like that would be very helpful for the team overall in their roster construction because he played 3 seasons of college basketball. He's 21. If I'm remembering that correctly, I feel like I remember he's 21. Point being a more like seasoned player entering the NBA than Dereck Lively, and you're already getting that impact from Lively. So hopefully at some point you would like to get that like stable, consistent like rotation role from Omax because he has the intended physical tools that you would like. On the wing, and so far he's played spot minutes like when there's been injuries, and I think it's going to be obviously already a slower process for him than Lively, but I think like just overall like big picture wise it'll take some time, but that's why this month will be important with all the injuries that are going on right now. If he can show that he can handle consistently knocking down outside shots, that would be a big win because that's the calling card for a lot of the other players that are getting minutes right now, and then building upon that going forward.
You guys like your Canadians, man. You guys like your Canadians. Dwight Powell, AJ Lawson, Omax. I'm just saying, maybe potentially.
Well, I'm biased because my mom's from Canada. So
I'm she? I didn't know that. There you go. Let's just look at that. Wait, whereabouts in Canada?
In Saskatchewan, Regina.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, very nice. Well, my good friend Samson Folk, friend of the podcast, he is also from Saskatchewan. So, okay, would you look at that? Very, very nice. Hey, we got a lot of Canadians on the Dallas Mavericks side, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I guess, look, final thoughts, anything you guys kind of want to add before we head out of here, Mavericks-wise, and just generally anything really. Lauren, I don't know if you want to kind of throw anything out there.
I do have kind of like just a last minute quick question for Grant. I guess my question is, how do you feel about some of these names that are getting tossed out there on the trade market? I think I think Zach LaVine is like not, I don't think that there's really much of a discussion to have there. But as far as like trying to make something happen with Pascal, or even entertaining an expiring kind of rental situation with DeMar, or even in light of the PJ Tucker stuff that kind of was circulating a bit today, are there any names out there that are really interesting you, or are you kind of like continuity, keep establishing and growing what we're working on? Where are you at?
Well, I do think overall, if there can be a big move for the right piece, I mean, that sounds like a cliche, but
Yeah.
I think that would probably be the way to go. Like
Yeah.
if you have like interesting situations in the NBA where like an expiring contract wants to go somewhere, like I don't think that's necessarily the case with the Mavericks, because we probably know about it by now. But if you have that sort of situation, whether it's like OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, that would be the perfect world. But I do think if you're looking to like add a patchwork sort of like, you know, like add a talent to the rotation sort of situation, I think having someone that really checks the boxes of like, you know, defensive versatility would definitely be the priority. But then you get into a situation where PJ Tucker's pretty old for a role player right now, and his corner three isn't the most consistent the last couple of years. And I think I'm being kind of kind when I'm saying that. So I think overall, like that probably wouldn't be the one necessarily. You ideally want to add a piece with how limited the trade assets are, if it's mid-season, to be like a multi-year sort of like element to the team. Because overall, if you do a trade now and it involves a future first-round pick or even a young player, that really takes away from the big swing they could make in the offseason, because that's when a lot of their picks, like assuming there isn't a disaster where they're like they're not conveying their pick this year with the top 10 protection, then you would have more unlocked, even though they have traded some of their future first-round picks, like the 2029 to Brooklyn for Kyrie, and then the 2030 like swap to San Antonio in that Grant Williams trade. They still have the ability to like use multiple first-round picks, and you know, maybe those young players will be more enticing to a team that's more mentally prepared to take that rebuilding approach instead of a mid-season change like that for a big player. So I think overall, that's probably like the fine line you'd have to walk. But I do think right now it's probably a combination. Like you do want to see some continuity to see how, like, you know, like Grant Williams is viewed as a defensive leader. He's going to be important, and as a key communicator alongside Dereck Lively, who's getting used to the NBA. You probably want to keep that stable, where you know you're really growing on that going forward. But I think if you have some players who may be outperforming short-term contracts, maybe you think about that a little bit. Like Derrick Jones has been, you know, like a strong piece, but like, is that going to be a piece that they're able to really retain if he keeps producing at that level? He's probably going to be able to get like MLE money somewhere else, I would think, is my guess. So then you have to start to think like, who's retainable, what can be moved mid-season. And Josh Green now has the poison pill provision because of his extension. So that makes it more challenging to involve him in a trade as well. So then you're a little limited on like the situation you have, but you can involve like Tim Hardaway Jr.'s contract, maybe Rashawn Holmes, but that's a negative value contract right now based off of like how he's not really been a factor last couple of seasons in the NBA. So I think like you get into a thing too where it's like, what are you trading Tim Hardaway for? Because we did talk about like, while there are drawbacks to having 6'5" shooting guard kind of play the three, when he is on a flamethrower like a heater, that's pretty impossible to stop for a lot of defenses. So like that was one of the big swing factors last year, and seems to be again this year, is when he's got it rolling from three. So if you're moving him, what is it for? Probably on the wing. But then what team is necessarily looking in the Tim Hardaway Jr. market to trade their wing with limited assets as well? So I think overall it'll be interesting to think about. You also don't know how other teams value certain young players. Some may be like really out on Jaden Hardy. Some may love Jaden Hardy. We don't know. And then like same with Omax Prosper, because he did go 25th in the draft, or 24th in the draft, I should say, is what it was. So like there were some teams that decided to pass on him. So like overall, how those guys build their value up, how they change perceptions or embolden perceptions that are positive already, will kind of be interesting. But overall, they don't have the best war chest, I think, mid-season for a trade. But I do think like some of those names, probably the top
in the
names,
off
which
season
is not really like the most like genius. Like, oh, OG Anunoby would help the Mavericks, or Pascal Siakam would help the Mavericks. But I do think like seeing things that like develop in the trade market overall would be probably important, because I do think like, you know, PJ Tucker probably isn't the best option in my opinion personally. I think you want more like height as well, because he's also in the kind of like smaller, like he's got a big frame. He's kind of like Grant Williams in a similar respect, where it's like, not ideal size, like height wise. So then you kind of get into the same situation where, you're not really like taking the steps forward to fill the holes that you kind of have. So I think, if there's a wing that becomes available later on that they can acquire, that probably would be great. But then again, if they can acquire them, a lot of other teams can, which gets into the whole like contract situation. You'd have to have someone really want to go to Dallas for a midseason move, in my opinion.
Right.
Okay.
I'm with you.
I feel like I'm mavericked out. I feel like I've got what I need to, at least to the playoffs. Like Grant, first of all, obviously great work as always. DallasBasketball.com. You do phenomenal work. I'm always tapped in there. Lauren, you always do great work. Mavericks, you already know. But yes, as always, for the people who are listening, you can check out Grant's work. We'll drop it in the link in the description if you guys want to. At the same time, we appreciate you guys tapping into the Objective Basketball Podcast. Like, subscribe, do the rating, the things that you guys usually do. And we will see you guys later. Take care.
Follow hosts at Just S. Barahini on all socials and at The Lauren Gunn on Twitter. The Objective Basketball Podcast, delivering the NBA to you like no other.